I would like to start by sort of putting out my deepest gratitude to you, Claire. Like, putting a consumer up front in a forum like this we've come a long way in a short period of time, and it takes people like you to be able to see the importance of consumers within the health industry. So it's a pleasure, and it is my absolute pleasure to be here, and I am really looking forward to listening to all the research that's going on in QDEC today. So I'm going to start with something that's a little bit abstract. Does anyone know what this is? There's a few people putting up their hands there. So I'll give you a hint. Imagine you're lying in a hospital bed and looking at the ceiling. Does that give you any more of an idea as to what's going on there? What it actually is a Wi-Fi access point. There's a number in the room here. There's a couple you can see in the corners there with their nice, bright blue lights shining. At the moment, you can't see that blue light, but in the middle of the night, that's pretty bright. It's even brighter when it changes from blue to green because it's changing the frequency that it's working at, and different people are connecting to that access point. Really minor, random thing that you wouldn't get to see the perspective of unless you're a patient or carer sitting in that room late at night. As you can see, that problem has been solved in this situation. There's a whole heap of different types of medical tape that you can get your hands on in the ward of a hospital. The reality is it was a very simple configuration change, one configuration change that took barely minutes to turn that light off across the hospital. There's no reason for that status to be shown. Yes, there's reasons for, fire alarms and things to make sure that we can see that they're working, but a Wi-Fi access point, not necessarily important unless you're doing some diagnostics to see whether things are working or not. So why am I telling you about Wi-Fi access points in hospitals? It's those small things that can really matter to that overall consumer experience. It's also little things like that you can get a different perspective of what's going on. There's a whole heap of things that I could cover today, but if you're after like the individual thing that you then want to, turn off, go back to TikTok, write an email, work on your research, two things that I'd ask you to think about where consumers can help you: perspective and advocacy. Through the next few minutes, I'll sort of go through as to what and how we can actually help you with that, and where we can learn from you as well. The previous example sort of showed that in a couple of ways: the perspective of lying on a bed looking at a ceiling, but also that advocacy that was required to be able to make that small change. So, a little bit about myself. You may look at this picture. This is a picture of my family, and you'll see this picture and you'll think, some of you have seen this before. And you look at that, and it's pretty clear that there's one person in that picture that is a health consumer. They're a patient. But the point I'd like to make here is there's ripples of the effect of a patient. Is just one person in this picture the health consumer, or is it the whole family? Is it the community that surrounds them? Were it the people that, were bringing food, dropping kids off at school for us during a period of time? Think of that perspective, of the little things that you're doing within research now, those ripple effects that may be affecting the patient, but then affecting the broader community and that whole health system as well. So, here's my family. If we just start from the left and work right, my son, Oliver. He finished his physics exam for grade 12 yesterday, so he's done with school. He's looking at doing engineering. Then there's me, Craig. I work for Microsoft as a technology strategist. It's a fancy way of saying I'm a pre-sales engineer. Colleen, my rock, the foundation, my sounding board. She's the one that holds the family together, and I have very strong bonds with, and we work together as a family. Piper, she's in grade 10, loves kids, hugely energetic. The excitable one in the family, the rest of us are introverts. But as you might guess, and as I've sort of mentioned, the patient in this picture is Violet. And that's where we've experienced the health system in in a strong way. Violet is deeply loving, empathetic, grateful, and resilient. In 2015, after her 6th birthday and multiple ED visits and visits to GPs, a tumour the size of a tennis ball was found near her left kidney. She had neuroblastoma, stage 4 cancer that had metastasised through her body. Treatment started straight away. The roller coaster, as you can see, for Violet lasted 6 years. As a technologist and problem solver, the health system was a learning curve for me. I guess this could be turned into that. I've turned all the statistics and data that I could get a hold of and then threw that out and actually just drew a line on a PowerPoint slide, because the data can mean one thing, but the lived experience is a whole other thing. Towards the end of frontline therapy, so that was that first sort of upward thing there. It was like frontline therapy was pretty intense process. Because I was so interested in the health system, I became engaged in the Children's Health Queensland Family Advisory Council, which I met Karen, who's up the back, who's actually working on the diabetes project. And that helped me learn more from other patients and families. I'm not going to go into too much detail about Violet's treatment. Some of you have seen these, but it's like these are the stats that I sort of like brought down and distilled to try and tell a little bit of a story. But ultimately, Violet had her victory over cancer and was welcomed into heaven just over 2 years ago. I say statistics here, but I really mean the health system as a whole. It's complex, can overwhelm from a consumer perspective. There's so much information, so many different things to navigate. And the way that consumers learn is from each other, which I think that there is a similarity from that technology perspective. It's like, as soon as I tell people I work for Microsoft, they've got, oh, I've got a problem with this. Not sure whether there's very many medical professionals in the room that's like, oh yeah, I'm a doctor. It's like, oh, I've got a problem. So by engaging customers early, it helps drive that literacy of the community. It helps guide the messaging as a researcher that you may want to be able to get out there and get people, and not only the medical community but the consumers, to understand what you're actually looking at. It helps you adapt your approach and help you with that translation from research to bedside. As I said up front, I think QDEX made a massive and a great choice in engaging consumers and having that consumer advisory committee within that research space. I also think you've taken on a massive challenge in combining health and digital together. It's a huge thing to solve. We don't often see them together, but we are seeing them move together more and more. And I think they have a symbiotic relationship. I put ChatGPT there for a reason, because if we start looking at that technology adoption, it's increasing at like this rapid rate. And this is a graph that sort of shows that to reach 100 million users, the recent times, Facebook took 4.5 years. ChatGPT 12 months ago was not released. It was at the end of November that ChatGPT came out. In 3 months, they reached 100 million users. AI is moving at that pace that it's like products it's being embedded in and being made generally available within those short periods of time. Feedback loops are so tight in software that changes occur daily. I wrote daily, but actually they're continuously happening. There's continuous deployment, continuous integration that's happening. Experimentation happens at scale within that technology realm, not only to improve the software, but to keep people engaged. That may or may not be a good thing. The feedback loop even starts before the products are built, things like Kickstarter. There's multiple things that have contributed to the speed that software is moving at. Part of this, I think, can be tied to around 2001, there was an Agile manifesto written. You can go and look that up. But if you look at behind what the manifesto is saying, there's a focus that's on consumers and on change. Both those things I saw in what Claire was mentioning earlier as well. People are now at a point where they're dealing with change within that technology and software space, and they sort of expect that. Our challenge is that we're expecting that everywhere, and it's putting pressure on the health system, it's putting pressure on everything to be able to want those changes, to be able to have, you know, those ratings, those feedback loops happening really fast. I wrote this down. There was like, I doubt we'll ever get to, you know, evidence-based medicine changing on a daily basis. But then as I was driving in this morning, I was thinking, medicine has already been there before technology. As physicians, you're making decisions based on the evidence that was there. You were getting the feedback from the results. You're listening to patients and then making decisions based on that. Using technology now is part of that. So, who's your advocate? I'm not talking about standing on the curb with a picket sort of saying, hey, everyone needs a piece of digital research for health. I'm not talking about setting up, you know, social media groups to be able to sort of get more followers on QDEC. I'm talking about the relationships that you can build now. The QDEC Advisory, Consumer Advisory Committee is a great start. We're ready to engage, to provide our insight, but also learn from your research so we can help advocate for you. We can be your champions to educate the community of what future health looks like. If we go back to my story with Violet for a moment, advocacy happened in multiple ways. And that initial slide that I had where I had advocacy, I had arrows going in different directions. If you think of that from my perspective, I was not only giving Violet a voice and being her advocate to medical professionals, I was also the medical professionals' advocate, negotiating, providing rewards for why she needed another procedure or scan. So, back to the statement that Claire asked me to speak on, you know, why embedding the voice of customers in digital health is more important than ever. I feel that technology's raced ahead, partially from that continuous learning and those metrics and data and tracking and all those things that you can get from technology. But it's time for health to embed those further and catch up. Engaging consumers gives research an edge. It gives you that patient perspective and advocacy to help land your challenges. So the question was, how can we translate this to the economically disadvantaged? Is that just loosely what we're saying? And my response on that is I think that technology has a way to come within that in learning from the health system and thinking from an inclusive perspective. But in saying that, technology also can help in being inclusive as well. So economically disadvantaged, quite difficult, but tech companies have heaps of cash. It's like challenging them to be able to, in asking that question all the time as to like, well, how are we helping with, you know, low socioeconomic areas to be able to get technology in the hands of those people, getting more technology that's accessible within health systems so it's not necessarily I have to come with a device, the device is already there for them to be able to act in. Tech companies use some of those things from a marketing perspective as well, but there is a true heart behind some of the things that they're doing in sort of including from that inclusion perspective. If you look at things like text-to-speech and whatever is not necessarily just for, you know, being able to here it's like used from a inclusion perspective. So I guess there's multiple layers. I could probably think about that a little bit more, but great question. Yeah, and like that's something that's talked about in tech, quite like the democratization of technology. Like it's no longer, it used to be those with power would be the ones that could hold the information, whereas that information is now out there for people to be able to consume. The interpretation of that is where, you know, professionals sort of need to come in, which is where it used to be Dr. Google and now it's Dr. ChatGPT. But it's pushing back on some of those AI models and things like that as well to be able to make sure that they're responsible in a way as well, and that they're ethical in the way that they respond to that. And it is good to see in a lot of the AI movements that, you know, safety and responsibility is being thought of as well. So you're talking about ships already moving. How do I get consumers engaged?
Yeah, and listening to them.
So it's the and listening to them piece as well. The getting them engaged thing is easy. You just need to ask. It's like, hey, I think I need a consumer perspective on this. Or, hey, I'm not sure if I even need a consumer perspective on this. It's like working with Colleen or the team on engaging the QDAT consumer advisory should be fairly straightforward to be able to get those engaged. How to be listened to potentially also comes down to the individual. And I was talking to Graham earlier, and I think it's partially around having a growth mindset. As researchers, I think you're already in that inquisitive space, and it's like that inquisitive space just needs to be broader in thinking about, well, who's this affecting? You know, what's the end point of this research? But then also think about it from that grant, like it's a very hard structured system. It's like there's a whole heap of things that you could challenge. Even the grants process is like how do they embed, you know, the consumer engagement on that? And I have been involved in some grants processes where it's putting the voice of the customer into those requests as well, which is still early, not quite where you're saying, but I guess I say don't be afraid in engaging consumers, but how do we get people to listen? Speaking in their language. And it's like I showed stats, and it's like is the statistics, is the numbers the thing that you can sort of show that it's like, well, here is a way that when we've embedded consumer engagement early, we've had better outcomes. I don't know whether that's a meta research that can be done to be able to see, you know, the value of that research. We're in an interesting space with QDEC, right? Is how, like, and part of the reason, and most of the reason, was not for my presentation, was for me to hear from you, to hear from what research projects and things are going on. But Colleen and I were just talking before, how do we solve that? And it's like maybe it is like these lightning type rounds to a group of consumers, but then you get that broader understanding. It's not like a one-to-one basis, but then that knowledge transfer, it's not something that, you know, I tongue-in-cheek sort of said statistics don't matter. They do, but it's like how do you quantify relationships? How do you quantify life? I think that's one of those questions. Like, I think we're just going to have to stumble through that to work out a way forward. I don't have the answers, but willing to sort of work through it and work out how we come to a result.